Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial about Dungeondraft, a mapmaking tool from Megasploot, which will allow you to create battle maps very quickly and efficiently. So this is the main window when you open Dungeondraft. Here you have the version of Dungeondraft. Currently this is the latest one, and I would recommend to use the latest one because in general it's the best version. You can see here if you need to update or not. Before we start, if you have a very big screen, I would suggest to go into the preferences and then into interface to use this option, enlarge UI. It will make everything bigger and you will see everything better. So now, what do we have here? There's, of course, the menu with some stuff in there, then the create a new map button, the open map button, then there's the assets, the mods, and about. So obviously this is to create a new map, so we will see that a little bit later. The two buttons up there are pretty important because we can add more assets to Dungeondraft. Here you can see we have a very big list of custom assets, but just so you know, the software comes with default assets, so you don't have to get any of those. These are optional, but you can add them if you want. But if you get the software, you can start a map right away. Just make sure this button is turned off, because this would disable the default assets, and if you turn this on, you won't have any asset to put on your map. So turn this off. This is very important if you don't have any custom asset. And now for the last button, the mods. They are made by the community, and they are here to enhance the program, to add more tools, more functionalities, and they are very optional, especially if you're just starting with Dungeondraft. Okay, so now let's start a new map. So here you have some things you can do. There's the size template, so you can choose from this list, and you can even create a template here. But if you want to have a custom size map, you can type in some numbers here, up to 200 by 200. You have some options here you can enable or disable. These options will be remembered next time you start a new map. Don't overthink about these three, because these ones will be available when you're working on your map. So it's not very important, it's just here to make you gain some time. But this one, the map wizard, this is the only way to get to it, because it's something you won't be able to reach after you've started a map. This is a way to generate random dungeons and random caves, so if you want to start with that, you need to check that little box. So we have the map wizard here, and here are some tools you won't be able to access right now because we are in the map generator. But it will be available once you click on finish here. So you can make a cave or a dungeon, you can choose some floors, some walls, and change some stuff here. So if you want, you can generate. This is the kind of stuff you can get. It's pretty easy to use. If you don't have any inspiration, you can generate a random dungeon or a random cave, and you can start with that. It's pretty cool. So now let's click on finish, and you will notice that these buttons are not grayed out anymore, so you can use these tools. So what do we have here? We have some categories of tools. You can click on them to show the tools in them. We have the design tool, the terrain, the objects, the effects, the settings, the text, the prefabs, and then the selection tool. Here you need to click on this to select anything on your map. This is very important to understand. How do we move on a map? You have some info here on the bottom of the screen. You can click with your mouse wheel or press space to move around the map. To zoom in or zoom out, you can press Ctrl and use the mouse wheel. You also have the zoom here. You can choose a percentage of zoom. So just next to it, we have some buttons. Here you can disable the grid. You can disable the snapping to the grid. If you stay a little on the name, the shortcut will be displayed. You can disable the lights here. There's no lights on the map, so you don't see anything. Then there's the alignment tool. So it helps you to align your assets even without the grid. So you can see we're on the line and it's easier for you, here and here, for example. The shortcut is H. Then we have R for ruler, so you can measure distances. This is this button here. Then this part is for the levels, so I will get to there a little later. Before we start anything, I would recommend to go to the preferences here and have a look at this, because we can set the automatic backups. This is very important. You will need that if the program crashes. You can set the frequency of the backup here. So I would really recommend to turn this on. You have some other preferences here and there, the interface and the shortcuts that you can edit here. We have the change map size here. If you use this button, you can add some tiles or remove some tiles. This is very practical if you've made a map too big or too small, but be aware that you won't be able to undo what you've changed with this feature. So you'll need to have a backup of your map, a copy of it, so you're sure you won't lose anything in case it goes wrong. So we have a bunch of other stuff in that menu, but this one is important. Open user folder, because this is where you will find your backup files. So I have a bunch of them, but also the config file, which can be deleted sometimes to fix some problems. Let's start with the tools here. So we have the building tool, which is a way to create buildings very quick, very fast, and very easily. You have some shapes here. You can do these, for example. You can choose some other walls or some other floors. You know, you can make a free form, and you can edit points if you want. So you noticed that if I change a wall and or a floor, when I move a point, the whole building will be updated. So this is something that is good to know, but just be aware that if you want to connect two different floors and or two different walls, then it won't be possible because the tool is not made for that. It's just a very quick way to create buildings. So yeah, be aware of that. If you want to have more control over that, you will need to use the wall tool and the pattern shape tool. One more thing, if you want to remove a part of your building, you can just press Alt and draw a shape, so it will be removing what you're drawing, so this is pretty useful. So let's go for the other tools now. First, let's start with the wall tool. To finish a line or a drawing in any tool, you can press Enter or right-click with your mouse. If you want to edit a point, you can go into the Edit Points mod and then move them around. If you want to delete a point, you can press Delete on your keyboard while you're on the point you want to delete. If you want to delete a point while you're making the shape, you can press Backspace and it will delete the last point you've made. If you want to connect two walls, for example, like this to avoid this black line in the middle, you can create the first one, then press Ctrl on your keyboard, place your mouse at the end of the wall, and then draw your second wall. You will see this is only one wall. You will notice that we have some sorting options over here. So for example, if I draw a first one, then I set the sorting to be over, the second wall will be over it. If I choose under, it will be under it. Just know that you won't be able to change that for the walls afterwards. You need to place them correctly the first time you draw them. You will find these sorting buttons in many other tools too. An important thing to know is that you won't be able to move your walls once they are placed, unless you use the Edit Points mod. You have several wall styles to choose from here, so they all will look different, and you can also set them a color if you want. Of course, this is pretty ugly right now, but I think it can be useful. Also, if you go to the selection tool, you can replace a wall by another. The same way, you can replace the path and the patterns by another one. If you want to make a curved wall, you can just draw your wall, then hold down Shift, then click, and then you can bend it. That is also the case for some of the tools, like the pattern shape tool and the path tool. If you want to delete a section of your wall, it's possible. You just need to go into Edit Points mode, then place your mouse between 2 points here, for example, and then press Delete on your keyboard. You can do this as much as you want. Okay, so there are 2 more things in this tool that you might need to know. First, the shadow. You can turn on or off the shadow here. For example, this is with the shadow on, this is with the shadow off. And then with that button here, you can have some very sharp corners. For example, like this. Now, if you want to place down a door, you can just go into the portal tool here and place a door or a window or anything really. In general, you need to use a wall to place down a door or a window, like this. But you see this button anchored? When you click on it, it becomes freestanding and then you can place down a door or a window anywhere you want. You can even rotate it if you want. If you need to have this door but reversed, you can click on rotate and then it will be reversed. In general, in this kind of lists, the first asset will be a blank one, so it's pretty useful in some cases to place down on your map. You will have this in the pattern tool too, so it won't really be blank, it will be more of a plain color that you can change before or after placing it, but it's good to know that you can do that. Okay, let's go to the pattern tool now. Let's say I want a pattern here, and let's say this one, and I want another floor next to it, just around it, like this one, for example. You see, this is on top of the other, so I don't want that, and I will just go in the selection tool, select this one, and use send to back. Or you can choose another layer. By default, it's on the layer 100, so use a layer 1, but you have some other layers that you can use. You can't use the grayed out ones because they are made for specific tools like the terrain tool, the wall tool, the water tool, and so on. If I select this pattern and I use the layer 2, for example, it will be over the other one, which is on layer 1. You can also use above roofs and above walls, so you can see, for example, here you can't see the walls anymore. Back to the pattern tool, there is some more stuff you need to see. You can set the layer here, you can rotate the pattern, you can choose to make a round one or whatever, and you can also change the color or add an outline. The outline is the little line around, see, with outline and without. If you want to erase something here, you won't be able to do it like in the building tool. If you want to make a hole, for example, you need to create the hole with manual points. For example, if I want a hole here, I won't be able to do it, but I can edit points, add a point here, 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 like this, and now, yes, I have a hole now. So this is a way to do it. So now let's go to the roof tool. In the roofs you can do several things, you have several options. You have the first one, which is a simple roof like this. You just need to click and drag a shape. You can have another kind of roof, like this, for example, with a different shape. You can choose several types of colors and type of roofs here. And you can also add some dormers. For example, let's say I'm gonna add one like this. I can add another one here, for example. So this is nice. This is just something that looks like this when you're drawing it. You can change the sun direction, you can change the shade contrast, and you can also disable the shade totally. So one last thing, you can draw a manual shape. You can change the width of the shape. It's pretty important to have a roof that looks good. So for example, let's say I'm gonna draw this and this. Well, this is really, it's not very good looking, but you get the idea. So now let's move to the cave tool. Here, it's pretty simple. You have a part to dig a cave and a part to blast open the cave. So digging the cave is just very simple. You just need to brush where you want your cave to be, and then the cave appears. If you hold Alt, you will be able to erase the cave. And if you go into the blast open section, you can open the cave by just clicking on some areas. You can also hold Alt to undo what you've done with the blast open part. And if you want, you can change the style of the cave. You can also change the color of the cave, but only on this style, not on the second one. For example, let's say I'm gonna make a blue cave. My cave is now blue. And same for the wall. But it won't work on the second one. You can set the floor to be transparent, so you can get only the walls, or you can do the opposite, get only the floor. So this is pretty much it for the cave part. I believe this is all you need to know about the design tab, so now you can switch to the terrain tab. Let's start with the terrain brush. Here you have some textures that you will be able to use underneath your map. For example, the brown one you see here is the dirt. You have by default 4 different texture slots that you can use, and you will be able to change the texture of the slot by clicking on this button on the right. You can set another, so for example I chose moss here. So if I click now that I have my my brush, I will set some moss, but if I go there, you notice that it will go under the building and under the pattern. And I can use another one. I can, for example, use some gravel. I can make a small path, for example. And if I decide to change, for example, this one, which is the first one we have under everything, I can change it, and let's say some void. You have also some options to fill every part of your terrain. So for example, if I click here, there is nothing else but grass. And you can also enable smooth blending, so it will look like this instead of this. You can also disable totally the terrain if I click here on this button. So when you export a map, all the terrain part will be transparent if you export in PNG, for example. One more thing about the terrain, you can unlock 4 additional slots at the bottom of the left panel. So if you don't think you have enough variety in your terrains, you can add 4 more. Just be aware that if you do that, it can take up some resources, and if your computer is a bit old, it can be a problem. You also have some presets here. So for example, if your map is in a desert, you will have by default in these 4 slots the terrain that will correspond to the desert, prairie, swamp, and so on. And here, this is the size of the brush, so I can use the mouse wheel to change it, but the intensity I can't do it with the mouse, so I need to use this slider. So for example, if I use a very low intensity compared to a very high intensity, Yes, you get it, I guess. If you want to add some water on your map, you can go into the water brush here. Then you will see you have some brushes or some shapes. The brushes will look like this, and the shapes will look like this. So you can see we can change the color of the water, but for that you will need to update the shape. If you don't update the shape, the color won't be changing. If you want to erase some water, you can press Alt and then erase an area. You can also do that with the shapes. If you want to change the blend distance between the shallow color and the deep color, you can change this slider. So for example, this is very deep. Let's just update our water. And this is very shallow. You can also disable the border here if you want to. Now that we've done the water brush, we can go into the material brush, which is probably the hardest brush to explain. Basically, you can paint texture like this with brushes. But each texture will be on its own layer. And you can erase a texture by clicking Alt, but you need to select the correct texture to do that. Also, each texture will have its own layer here too, so you can brush a texture over itself. And if you want to erase, of course you need to select the correct layer, because otherwise it won't be erasing the correct texture. If you want to have smooth borders on a specific texture, you need to select the texture and then click on Smooth. It's different on each texture, so you can do it separately. You can also move a texture to the front by using Move to Front if the two textures here are on the same layer. Here they are both below water. Now we can go to the Path tool. This is a very powerful tool. You need to select a path on the right. You see I have several styles, and then you just click to add a point and click and drag. If you want to edit points, you go into Edit Points mode, and then you can see the points you've made. You can move them around if you want to change the shape. If you want to have some sharp corners, you can reduce the smoothness and then draw again. You can select the layer, you can select the sorting, and then you can also change the width of the path. For example, a very large path or a very narrow path. You can also change the transition in and out. For example, if I choose fade, the transitions are fading. And if I choose none, the transitions are very sharp. I can also choose grow and shrink. Grow will be for the first transition here, and shrink will be for the last transition here. So, since you have a lot of different paths, you can do a lot of different stuff with that. For example, a cliff will look like this if you use shrink and grow as transitions, which will be more natural than just none. You will also be able to select and change your path in the selection tool. On the right part here, you have a search engine that you will be able to use to search through your path. This is very useful when you have a lot of paths, for example when you have some custom assets. This engine will be available in some other tools like the Object tool. Path can also block light with this button. Let's say this path will block light, this one will block light, but this one won't. If I set a light in the middle, you will see that the path will block or not the light. Let's go into the Objects tab. So we have two tools in here. The main one is the first one, the Object tool. So there again, you can see you have the search engine, so you can search very strictly or very not strictly. So you have a lot of objects here. You can put, for example, I've seen some sort of statue here. So let's put a statue just here. You notice I'm using snap, and here I'm disabling snap. So let's say there are some statues. You can enable or disable shadows here. So I prefer without, but you can use with it, of course. And let's say if I look for statue but with a typo, with a Z at the end, I can still use it when I'm in fuzzy mode, but if I'm looking for exact, I won't find anything because I'm just I'm making typos. So you have a lot of objects you can put on your maps, and these are the default assets. So all this list here is stuff you can put on your map. This is pretty nice in my opinion. Let's just put some chest here, and let's search for plant. Maybe no flower. Yeah, flower. Let's put some flower here because I like flowers. You will notice that these assets have a little icon on the top left corner. That means that they are colorable. You can change their color or part of their color. Not all the assets are colorable, but all those with this icon on the left are. So for example, I want a purple flower or pink flower. Yes. So now I'm using only pink flowers. And you see it changed here too. And if I just delete, you can see some stuff is becoming pink too. So this is all colorable assets. And if you want to change after you placed down your assets, you can click it and just change the color here. You have a simple selection of some colors, but you can add more, and you can choose each color you want separately. So very, very interesting. You can find some of your assets that you placed on your map here in the used tab, and you have some tags on the left. So here, if I click here, you can see, for example, if I'm looking for snow, I can click on snow and I have some snow assets. That's a useful tip to when you're looking for some stuff. In cave, you will have some stuff you can put in the caves. You get the idea. Of course, you can, as in many other tools, you can set it under or over. For example, let's say I'm gonna use this. If I put it over, or if I put it under, it won't be at the same place. But you can also use layers. So layer here, for example, layer 2. And this one is layer 1, but I can set it on layer 4 if I want. So yeah, it's very useful to make some interesting placements on your maps. So you have the rotation. Rotation can be used with just the mouse wheel, but you can also use Alt to scale up or scale down your asset. You can, as for the pass, use the block light option to make the object block the light. And that's about it. Then you have the scatter tool. It works the same as the object tool. You will have the same assets in there. But the difference is that it's made to place down several assets in a row, and it's made to randomize a bit the rotation and the scale. So you can use these sliders to randomize. So for example, with this one here, You see it's different rotation and different size. You can also change the spread. And one of the most interesting things with this is that it works with colorable assets too. So let's take our flowers and let's take these ones. I can select several assets in a row by holding Shift, and I can select several colors too by just clicking on them. So for example, I don't want this red, but I want blue, I want green, I want everything. So multicolor field of flowers, this is very nice. Now let's have a look at the light tool here. As you can see, we have 3 lights to choose from. This one, and this one. You can choose their range, very large or very small. You can do the same with the mouse wheel. You can also set their intensity with this slider, and you can also change their color. As you can see, the walls are blocking the lights. You can also rotate them by using Alt and the mouse wheel. So in the light tool, you also have a way to disable the shadows. So now the light goes through the walls. But remember when I told you that the objects could be also casting shadows? When you click on them, you make block light here and here, for example. And you go back to the lights and you see now they are casting shadows. So this is pretty interesting. So you can disable everything at once. And if I place down a light, I can just choose which light will make a shadow and which light won't. And then you can see the widgets. So you can see where I put my lights. You will also see the widgets in the selection tool, and you will be able to enable the shadows or not for each light there. You also have the environment lights, so you can set an ambience for your mood or an ambience for your map. So for example, if you set it to be blue, it will be like it's night. And you can also get some lights to make it like it's like a campfire or something like this. You know, it's pretty cool. Then we have the settings. So map settings will allow you to change the grid color, for example. If I set the grid again, you want it to be, let's say, pink, because why not? You can set it to pink. You can set it to whatever you want. You also can change the style of the grid. Let's just disable the lights. So here is the dashes, the default one, some lines, some thick lines. So yeah, it's something that is not very known, but you can change the grid style. You can also make it, if you use this slider, you can make it more or less transparent. Then you have some camera filters. So you can use printer friendly if you print your maps, so it will take less ink to print it. You have the sepia tones, because why not? And if you set it on none, it will be default. And then you have the building wear, which is something that will apply to your walls, only on the walls. So you will notice, for example, here, you see some texture on the walls that change. If you don't want it, you can just click on none, and that's it. Then you have the levels. So let's say this is a tower, because you see I've placed a staircase here, and I want to create the next level, the next story of this tower. How would I do it? I would create a new level, and I can clone this level if I want, because I don't want to redraw everything. So let's just do this. We will call it level 1. And it will switch to it if I click on this button. you can compare the levels, so that's interesting. You can see what's different on the different levels. Let's change some stuff. So now we've changed some stuff on the top level, we can compare the levels. And this button here will allow you to see all the levels you have, and so you can choose the level you want to be on. This is very useful when you have a lot of levels to choose from. So now let's talk about the trace image. This tool is when you have a map that you didn't make but you want to remake in Dungeondraft. For example, let's take this one. This is a map I made with Dungeondraft, but this is just an example. So you can see what we can do with Dungeondraft. These are custom assets, by the way. So you won't have this with the default ones, but this will give you an idea about what this tool can do. So anyway, the trace image is this image that you can put under your map and you can trace over it. So if I want to draw a wall, for example, let's say I want to go there, and you know, I can trace over it. It's really badly done, but you get the idea. So you can enable and disable the trace image with T. Just so you know, if your image is too small, if it appears really small, maybe this is because the base image you're using is too small. So you will need to change it in an image editor and make it bigger. Just to be sure, change its name too, because Dungeondraft might not recognize it's a new image. So yeah, that's just a little tip for you. And then you have the text tool. In my opinion, it's a bit annoying because it's not very intuitive. So you can go in edit mode and type a text, you know. So you can change many things, the color and such. You can add a box. Of course, my box is white, so yeah. But you understand the idea. But if you want to move it, you need to go into this tab. And I think this is very annoying and unintuitive. You can set it visible or not. You can sharpen the fonts or not. And change a bunch of stuff. So, yep. For me, it's not very practical, but it exists, so it's okay. And then we have the Prefabs tab, which is very nice to have because it allows you to group assets together and you can reuse them later as a group. For example, let's say I want to use these flowers and these statues, and I want to make them the same on all the walls of the tower. So I will select them all at once, and I will click here, I'm in the selection tool, I will click on Make Prefab, and I will call it Decor, for example. I can change what set it's in, I can create a new set, so let's say it's in Other, I accept, then everything is linked. You can unlink it by clicking on Separate, so now it's unlinked. And if you go back into the Prefab tab, you can go into my Other, and I go to Decor, and I can use it. So that's very interesting. You can place as much as you want. If I need 3, for example, I just go select them and rotate them, and I'm just gonna use them on every wall. So pretty useful too. So you have a lot of things here. You can select a prefab, let's say this one, Decor, and I can forget it. So it won't be here anymore if you made a prefab you didn't want. And then we have the selection tool. We've seen it a little bit, but there are some subtleties. The idea is that you have you just click on some stuff to select it, of course, but you have some filters here that will help you to select what you want. For example, the pattern in the middle is set to layer 1, and the other pattern around is set to below water. So it's under the middle pattern. In the filters, I can select what type of asset I want to select, for example, only the patterns. And if I select the layers, I can select only, for example, below water. If I select that, you see only one will be selected, only this one. If I don't use only below water, if I select, it will be a selection of the two patterns. So it's very interesting to have. You can also lock some stuff. So if this pattern is locked, you won't be able to select it, even if you have some filters that are not compatible. So it's very nice to have some way to lock stuff that you don't want to move. For example, the floors, usually. When you select something, let's say I'm gonna just select everything. When you select an object, you can delete it, you can copy it, but you can also do it with the keyboard. So let's say I'm just copying it, I press Ctrl+C, then Ctrl+V. You can also delete it by simply selecting it and using the delete key on your keyboard, but this is pretty standard. You can mirror an asset, so let's say this one, I want it in the other way, so you can do that. Oh, by the way, you can do it also by pressing A. Let's say this one, when you're placing down an object, if you press A, it will make it the other way around. One last thing in the selection tool, when you select an asset, you have this box, and when you go to the corner, you can see the cursor changes. So, for example, when it's 2 arrows, you can change the size of the asset, and when it's a hand, you can rotate the asset. And of course, if you place your mouse in the middle, you can move the asset. And now we can finally export our map. So the export button will allow you to export the map in several formats. For example, in PNG, JPEG or WebP. PNG is mostly uncompressed, so it makes big files, but they are pretty nice in quality. But they also keep transparency. JPEG is compressed and WebP is compressed too, but it can keep transparency if you need it. So it's the best format in my opinion. Universal VTT is a format that allows you to keep some data from your walls and your lights, so you won't have to redo them in your VTT like Foundry or Roll20, for example. Let's say I'm exporting in WebP, I can set the grid on or off, the lights on or off. You can change the quality. The best quality will make a bigger file, and of course the lowest quality will make it ugly but small. I would recommend to go around between 80 and 100, but 80 or 90 is pretty okay in general. Then you can, if you have several layers, you can have several levels, you can choose the level you want. You can also choose to have both levels, but one transparent, the other not. Another interesting thing in the export options is the focus slider. I've made a map to show you how it works. So for example, I have 2 levels. Here is the ground level. Here is the level 1. So we will choose the ground level as source level and level 1 as overlay level. And then you can set the focus to be a little off. So you will have the level 1 and you will see the bottom of the tower, but a little blurred, so it will give you a sense of depth. And then we have some camera filters, like we've seen, printer friendly and sepia. Then some grid presets. And then you can set the PPI for your map. So PPI stands for pixel per inch, and The default one is 256. If you want a smaller map, you can enter a smaller number, for example 100, and you'll see the number here will change too if I hit enter. Okay. Then you can crop your map before exporting, if you want. You can just click here and set a selection of the area you want to export, and then you can export like this. If you're not satisfied with your crop, you can reset it here. Now we can export our map. Let's say we keep these settings. Let's call it test. And here's our map. What a beautiful map. So this is the end of the tutorial. I hope it helped you, but if you still have some questions, feel free to join the Discord. The link is in the description. There's a lot of wonderful people there who will be very happy to help you. I hope I will see you soon, and in the meantime, happy map making!